Hello everybody, this is a video about solving equations using addition and subtraction. I am your host Mr. Shirley, fighting the forces of evil with the power of math, Coamo. Please make a note as you go through this video and make sure you put a date on it to make it look pretty and keep it organized. So our learning goal, surprisingly, is to solve equations using addition and subtraction. Again, please feel free to pause the video or rewind it if you need to. Okay, so what does it mean to solve an equation? I'm so glad you asked. Basically what that means is that you are determining what the unknown values are. Okay, so you're figuring out what the variables are. So in this case, you're trying to find out what n is. And yes, I picked an easy one. Hopefully even looking at that, you can probably figure out just by some simple process of elimination or guess and check what the answer should be. Okay, I did that on purpose. There's a number of different ways of doing that. So in this case, the answer would be 4, because 4 plus 3 equals 7. Okay? But there are methods that you can use for more complicated equations. Okay? And the equations we will be using this year are not generally going to be that complicated, but you're heading to high school soon, so you will face some that will be complicated. So please make sure you're comfortable with the method, even if you can see the answer faster. Okay, so on we go. First, just remember what an equal sign means. Okay, and this is getting towards the method we're going to be using. Okay, so what an equal sign means is that everything on the left side is equal to everything on the right side. Okay, so in this case, 5 equals 2 plus 3. Okay, yes, I know you all knew that. But if we want to add something to one side of the equal sign, we'd have to do the same thing on the other side to maintain the equality. Okay, so just as an example, if I wanted to add 1 to this side, so 5 plus 1, yeah, that's a very bad plus sign, but 5 plus 1, because there's an equal sign, I need to add plus 1 to the other side as well, or else it wouldn't be equal anymore. Okay, so I have to do the same thing to both sides. Hopefully that makes sense. We've done similar things with fractions and integers and things like that. So just whatever you do to one side, do it to the other side. It's the same idea with algebra. Okay, so if we have a plus 1 equals 10, okay, again, you could probably figure out what a is, but that's not what I'm getting at right here, so leave that aside for a moment. If I were to take a plus 1 and add 5 to it, for no particular reason whatsoever, I'm just pulling this out of the air, I would have to do the same thing to the other side in order to maintain the equality. Okay? Or for example, if I were to do a plus 1 minus 1, I would have to subtract 1 as well from the other side. Okay? In order to keep that equality. So whatever you're doing to one side, you're doing to the other side. All right, on we go. So when we're trying to solve an equation, what you're trying to do is get the variable alone on one side of the equal sign. That's going to bug me until I fix it with extreme prejudice. Equal sign. Okay, there we go. All good. Now, what that means is that, so in our question here, we've got x plus 2 equals 6. Yes, I know many of you could already figure out what the x is, but bear with me for a moment while we go through the steps, and then you can use the fact that you've probably already figured out what x is to tell if you did the steps correctly. That way, when you get to more difficult questions, you know the steps that you can go through to find that answer. Okay? So what we're trying to do then is we're trying to get that x alone, which means we have to get rid of that plus 2. We've got a plus 2 here that we need to do something with. Okay? And the way you would do that is you would subtract 2 from this side of the equal sign. Because what is 2 subtract 2? It's equal to 0, which means we're kind of getting rid of that positive 2. Okay, now remember from before, whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. So you have to have 6 minus 2 on this side as well. Okay, now of course 6 minus 2 does not equal 0, 6 minus 2 equals 4. But what the end result then is is that we end up, once we do the 2 minus 2 to get 0, and 6 minus 2, we end up with x equals 4. So we have solved that equation. We figure out what x is. And again, you probably knew that from earlier on because it's not tricky, but going through those steps, you can see how this might be useful if it was a more difficult equation where you looked at it and say, you know what, I'm not sure right away what that is. All right, I would like you to try this example just on your own, okay? So pause it, go through it, and see how you do. Okay, we'll assume you did that. Now, remember, we're trying to get rid of that -5 because we want the a all by itself on one side of the equal sign. So if we have subtract 5, if we want to make that equal to 0, we want something that added to or subtracted from -5 would equal 0. So -5 plus something equals 0. And if you remember back from our integers unit, you can use the opposite integer to figure out what that is. So we can take -5 plus +5, and that will equal 0. Okay? And I know you don't really need to write the positive. But what we're doing then is we're creating a condition where a can be by itself, where we've got two things equal to 0. So -5 plus 5 will equal 0. But again, we have to do the same thing to both sides. Okay? And we're left with a equals 11. So these two 5s add up to 0, or effectively go away, basically, because we don't really need to write the 0 anymore, and 6 plus 5 equals 11. So we're left with a equals 11. All right, on we go, adventurers. Okay, again, please take a moment, try these out. There's a couple of wrinkles in A and B here, and I would like to see how you would approach them. Okay, we'll assume you all did that. Now, when it comes, so for question A here, it doesn't matter even the tiniest bit which side of the equal sign X is on. Okay, so it can be on the right side just as easily. So it's easiest to just get it all on its own. Because we're subtracting 5 here, we need to add 5. Again, we're adding the opposite, or subtracting the opposite, but we're getting rid of that number that's right there. And then we do the same thing to the other side. So -5 plus 5 equals 0, 7 plus 5 equals 12, so x equals 12. Okay? If you know in advance, if you can look at that and at the first equation there, so 7 equals x minus 5, and say, oh yeah, I already know what x is, that's great. Try out the steps in the homework that I've given you for it, just to make sure that you are applying them correctly, because then you already know what the answer should be. Okay, and you'll catch yourself if you make a mistake. Now, whoops, that was weird. Shouldn't have uncovered the answer all the way. So 3.5 plus a equals 6.2. So you do the same process with decimals. You do the same process even if the a happens to be the second thing there. Okay, we're still, because we've got a positive 3.5, we want to subtract 3.5. Okay, plus a. And then we do the same thing to the other side. Okay, and then we're left with a equals 2.7. Now, please try out the questions that I've given you. The actual math should be fairly straightforward, so you shouldn't be using a calculator much for the questions that I've given you, but please look through it, try them out, and ask me any questions that you might have. We'll discuss this a little more during our meetings. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day. Go fight some evil.